It's my pleasure to introduce the chair of the next panel. Matteo Mecacci is a member of the Italian Parliament. He serves on its Foreign Affairs Committee. He's extremely active in promoting human rights within the Italian Parliament. In July, he was elected rapporteur of the Committee on Human Rights and Democracy of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, an activity that keeps him very busy promoting human rights on a regular basis. Matteo is also a friend of mine. He's been extremely active before he was an MP as an NGO activist here at the United Nations and elsewhere. He's been to countries such as Cuba to speak out for dissidents around the world, someone who's really dedicated his life to human rights and democracy, and we're so thrilled that he's able to be with us here today to chair the next panel. Before I give him over the microphone, I want to ask the interpreters to make sure that they interpret also the questions and to remind our speakers on the panel that they must wear the headphones when the questions are asked so that they'll have the benefit of hearing the questions interpreted as well. Matteo, thank you.
Thank you, Hillel, for your kind presentation. It's very good to be back here in Geneva. As Hillel has mentioned, I was here for many years as an NGO representative, and then, as it happens sometimes, you get from the NGO level also to the political level, and I have the opportunity to be elected 2 years ago in the Italian Parliament, and I think it should be part of the political agenda of every democratic country to continue to work in the field of human rights and to be present when you can hear stories and events like those we are going to hear today by the people who are represented in this panel, which is a very diverse panel. And I want to start to mention that, as you can see in the panel, we have an empty seat of a Cuban activist, Nestor Rodriguez Lobaina, who was supposed to be here to address this conference and maybe also to participate in other events at the Human Rights Council. But unfortunately, the Cuban government has not permitted him to leave the island, so he cannot be with us today. And probably the recent events in Cuba with the tragic death of Orlando Zapata Tamayo is a reminder for everybody of the situation in the island and what happened to Nestor Rodriguez Lobaina, and his impediment to be here with us today is probably linked to the repressive situation that is going on in the Cuban island. But fortunately, we have the opportunity to hear on the situation in Cuba from a very distinguished personality in the field of human rights and promoting democracy in that country. We have with us Ramon Castillo, who's a Cuban dissident, a former prisoner of conscience. He was promoters of many democratic initiatives in Cuba for many years, and he was one of those people who in 2003, the 18th of March, was arrested. 17 activists, trade unionists, intellectuals, politicians who were arrested by the Cuban government just for speaking out and for promoting their ideas. He has been in jail, he has been under great pressure from the authorities, and likely is here with us and will tell us more about it. Also, we're going to hear another personal story, which I think will be very, very important to listen to, and it should be important also that the institution listen to this. We have here with us Dong Yun Shin. He's from North Korea. North Korea is probably one of the closest societies in the world, and probably he was, we can say this, one of the youngest political prisoners in the world, because he was born as a political prisoner, being born in a prison camp in North Korea. And as unfortunately with few other North Koreans, defectors who have been able to escape the situation, he could tell us the story that unfortunately is unknown to the most part of the international community. Another personal story that we will hear is that of Bo Chi. Bo Chi is from Burma. He's a dissident. Also, he was a political prisoner in Burma, and he was one of the leaders of the movement then in 1988 tried to break the military rule in Burma, to have some fair and contested election in that country. We know how the history went. He will tell us more, and also about his story and the current situation that is approaching Burma, where we know that there are discussions about having new elections soon. But we know that at that time, when the elections were held and the people spoke out, then the decision by the authority was not to respect the will of the people and to maintain the military rule. So we have some cases and personal histories of prisoners, just for their ideas, prisoners of conscience. And on the other hand, we will hear also from people who in different countries are trying to help the people who suffer this. We have Tamara Suhu from Venezuela. She's a lawyer, and she has been very active in the field of human rights, trying to bring help, especially to the people in prison who suffer for political persecution. And in another continent, which might seem to all of you, far away, and in this panel we really cover almost the entire world, we have also the presence with us of Dewa. What's the last name? Sorry. I don't have anyway, he's from Zimbabwe, and he has been very active in the field of providing legal assistance in the country, where we know that there is now a very tense and difficult situation, with some attempts to find some political reconciliation among the different political parties, but this unfortunately is happening most of the time at the expenses of the rights, of the basic rights of the people who try to be active in the political field and in the human rights field, where the acts of oppression and violence are very often. So the role of these human rights defenders, people who try in the country that are ruled by authoritarian governments to protect the right of the activists to speak out, it's very essential. There are very, very few people in Zimbabwe or in Venezuela or in other places that do this job, which is as difficult and sometimes even more difficult of the activists themselves. So we will hear from these various and very different stories, which have one thing in common. These people are trying to affirm the right at the international level that every nation and every people has the right to express themselves, to promote their ideas, and they need to have protection. This is a universal value. It's a universal value that has been affirmed by the United Nations, affirmed by democratic states. So what this story is probably